Markets from New York to Shanghai have been in turmoil amid warnings one of China's largest property developers is on the brink of collapse. Investors are worried about Evergrande's ability to repay $300 billion of debt and whether Beijing will step in to rescue the company. As Paolo Montecillo reports, some are asking if China is about to face its Lehman Brothers moment.
Global financial markets are in their worst slump of the year, and it's all because of China's Evergrande group. The world's most indebted property developer is on the brink of collapse.
China, while it's experienced the biggest dip, has done so for very good reason. And I think investors ought to be cautious about the emerging markets in general, Chinese stocks in particular.
Evergrande is one of China's largest construction companies, but its growth was fueled mostly by debt. Now, the property giant owes more than $300 billion. The economic slump caused by the pandemic has made it more difficult to pay back that debt.
It's a combination of over-leverage, Chinese regulations to deregulate the property sector, and then the pandemic administered the coup de grace, and now it finds itself in the place it is.
Evergrande's bankers, suppliers, and investors are hoping for a government bailout. But ratings agency Standard & Poor's expects Beijing to stand back, as it's confident the company's failure won't drag down the rest of the economy. Others fear the crisis could spread far beyond China's borders.
So what we could see right now is more of a negative feedback loop impact, sentiment impact that actually spill over to the rest of the world.
S&P predicts Evergrande will default on around $80 million in interest payments this week. But the company says it'll meet its obligations eventually, with or without government help. Paolo Montecillo, TRT World.
Well, let's get more on this now with Craig Erlam in London. He's a senior market analyst at OANDA. Good to have you back with us, Craig. We did see quite a significant sell-off on Monday over fears about Evergrande's potential collapse. Why are investors so worried about the collapse of this Chinese firm?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is just the sheer size of the firm and obviously its debt burden, $300 billion. I mean, it's no small figure. This is a massive player in the property game in China, and the property sector has been huge during its growth over the last couple of decades. So it's quite clear that this has a massive role to play in the Chinese economy, and any collapse could have negative repercussions, not just for the company itself, but from anyone or anything linked to it. Banks, financial institutions, investors, and firms as well. So it's obviously a massive issue as far as China is concerned. And obviously, when people start talking about a Lehman kind of moment, we're looking at the collapse of a massive firm that could have significant consequences. And I think when Lehman did collapse, I think people didn't really understand what those consequences were necessarily going to be in terms of credit conditions, etc. So it's almost the uncertainty of all of this which leads to that little bit of nervousness which we're seeing creeping into the markets right now.
Can I ask you more about that? Because many analysts have said that China may be facing its own Lehman Brothers moment. Lehman, of course, was the huge Wall Street investment firm that collapsed in 2008 and essentially precipitated the global financial crisis. Do you believe that those comparisons are valid? Is China facing a Lehman moment here?
I mean, if the property firm itself did collapse entirely and absolutely nothing was done, then you would likely see turmoil in the property sector. You would see growth in China fall quite considerably, and you would potentially see aspects of a credit crunch. But I just don't think that's what we're going to see, and I don't think it's necessarily going to have global ramifications like the Lehman Brothers moment did. I do think that China is going to do something. They're not doing anything right now, but I do think there is going to be something. I don't think it's going to be a bailout per se. But I also don't think they're going to just let this firm collapse. The property sector is so important to the Chinese growth story and for employment and small businesses and everyone connected. It would be quite a considerable risk to just allow it to fail. If it did fail, like I say, I do think there would be quite significant ramifications, but I just don't think they'd be as widespread as what we saw in 2008 and onwards. There may be a credit crunch per se, but there's a lot of things that China can do in order to alleviate that maybe just weren't available just over a decade ago.
Yes, during the 2008 financial crisis, a lot of people were arguing that some of America's biggest banks were in fact too big to fail, basically saying that if they did collapse, that it would have huge ramifications for the American economy and the global economy. Do you think then Evergrande as well is too big to fail? You mentioned that a lot of people are wondering if Beijing will step in to rescue the company. That would essentially suggest that, yes, it is too big to fail.
It depends how you define too big to fail. As in that a failure of the firm itself could have big ramifications for the Chinese economy and so many people within China and for employment and for debt and for credit, then yes, it is too big to fail. It's too big. It should be too big to fail. And this is almost one of the difficulties that the Chinese leadership has right now is the message it's been sending for quite some time now is that it doesn't want to leave itself in a position where a company is too big to fail. It doesn't want that like a moral hazard. It wants to get to grips with that, and it's almost part of the reason why we are seeing various crackdowns. But then equally, what we're seeing right now is a company that's putting it in a very difficult position. And I think this is just where lessons have to be learned. Like I say, I don't think this is a Lehman-style moment, but I do think that Evergrande is arguably too big to fail if China does want to continue to prosper.
Okay, we'll see what happens in the coming days and weeks. Craig Erlam from OANDA, a pleasure as always. Thank you for that.